This week, Sears, after a long, well, I guess maybe not that long, but certainly a precipitous decline over the past less than a decade, filed for bankruptcy. And the easy, I think, facile explanation is that they just couldn't compete in this day and age of the internet. But that's not nearly the most accurate story, is it?
No. What's true is that the retail marketplace has changed a lot in recent years. But this is an industry that is constantly facing disruption of one kind or another, and that has learned to deal with disruption. So, for example, every time we have a recession, this is a problem for anybody who's involved in retail because you don't need a new dress, you don't need a new suit. You buy as little as possible of things and just make do if you're worried about your job. And certainly if you've lost your job and become unemployed, you don't have the ability to spend. So periodically, retailers face that kind of disruption. They face disruption from changing styles. There is, of course, a lot of change in the marketplace. The question is why a company like Sears, as big, as successful, as engraved in the memories of everybody who grew up in the U.S., why it was unable to respond. And for that, I think you have to look to the fact that they were owned and managed and run by a hedge fund that had little interest in Sears succeeding, more interest in lining their own pockets.
Now, Eileen, okay, and we should say also, and when we talk about Sears, it's not like Sears is not familiar with the idea of people not coming into the stores to buy things. They invented the notion practically of, if not invented, the notion of ordering remotely and having it shipped to you. But let's put that aside for a moment. Conceptually speaking, and I think this is difficult for people to understand because we have seen this story, though, now increasingly. We've certainly seen it in the past. We saw it with Toys R Us. We saw it with Anchor Hockey. We saw it with, I think, Sports Authority. What we have conceptually, and I want you to walk us through it and tell us who the players are, but tell me if this characterization conceptually makes sense. There is a quality to when the CEO and when the hedge fund essentially marries with Sears, buys Sears and gets into a union with them, it's as if they know they're going to get divorced 7-8 years down the road, right? When the kids go to college, we're going to get divorced. And what they do is they start basically bleeding the household income of money and burying it in the backyard. And by the end of this thing, the marriage as an entity has a lot of debt. They've hidden the money in the backyard and they walk away, essentially. That's what we're looking at here, right?
Well, I think that's a very good analogy. That in fact, whenever these companies are bought by private equity, they're intended to be sold in just a few years. This story has its own little twist to it because Sears remained a publicly traded company, and Edward Lampert and ESL, his hedge fund, what hedge funds do is they take over the control of publicly traded companies, and so if the share price goes up, they're happy to continue holding it. If the share price goes down and they have other ways of making money, which in this case they clearly did, then they're happy to do it that way. I will say that Edward Lampert and ESL, his hedge fund, adopted a lot of the practices that you see with private equity, taking resources out of the company, owning more than half of it so that they could actually dictate. And this was in some ways even more extreme because Edward Lampert not only is the founder of the hedge fund that bought up so much of their stock, but he became the CEO of Sears. He became the chairman of the board of directors of Sears. He is the head of the trust fund that owns Sears. He lent them tons of money, which he lent his hedge fund lent money to Sears, on which he and his hedge fund are collecting interest payments. And situated themselves should there be a bankruptcy, to be in the catbird seat in terms of figuring out who gets paid in the bankruptcy and who takes the losses. So he has covered every base there is.
And so, all right, and just so people understand, we have a situation. I mean, I think the first inclination of most people is to assume, oh, if someone is a CEO of a company and they own, if not the majority of the stock, a pluralistically, largest amount of the stock, they of course want that company to succeed. But he extracted so much wealth out of this, and just to be clear on this bankruptcy thing, as a son of a bankruptcy attorney. When a company goes into bankruptcy, there is a hierarchy of creditors, of people who are owed money who get paid first. He made sure, because he was on both ends of the deal, that in the event of a bankruptcy, and I'm not convinced from this story that he didn't know that a bankruptcy was inevitable, in fact, drove the company towards this, that he would get paid first. And way down on the list are, of course, obviously the workers who would lose their jobs, but those people who had deferred their compensation in the form of a pension who are going to get screwed on this as well. All right, so let's talk first about the first thing that Lampert did with ESL in terms of the real estate, because this is the one way that they basically stripped a huge asset that in a bankruptcy would be one of the first things that would generate the revenue to pay off creditors. How did they basically pull that real estate value out of the company?
So you are absolutely right. At this point, this is 2015, and he already knows that Sears is not going to survive. Everybody knew in 2011 that it was on the ropes. By 2015, he already knew this. And what he did is he took a bunch of Sears stores, including some of their most valuable properties, and sold the real estate to a real estate investment trust, which his hedge fund had set up. So this is ridiculous. He sets up a publicly traded real estate investment trust, sells the real estate on many, many of the Sears stores, hundreds of the Sears stores, including some of their most valuable real estate, to this real estate investment trust. He signs a contract, or has Sears sign he's the CEO, so he signs a contract with the real estate investment trust for the rents they're going to pay, which are high rents, with a built-in accelerator. Every year they're going to go up by a certain percent. For the stores that he keeps open, they are paying the real estate investment trust money, rent. But there are other stores in prime locations that he closes. And then the real estate investment trust, because they're no longer getting rent from Sears now, and they own the real estate, they then sell that use that real estate for different kinds of development projects. So putting up condos in Long Island, which they're going to rent, and which is going to be a very profitable thing for them.
Well, I'm just, I'm hearing this story, and I also have some questions about how they valued that real estate. I imagine that on the spectrum of whether it was undervalued or overvalued, I have a feeling when Lampert sold this property essentially to himself, but just basically created a firewall between the failing company, the entity that he was part of that was failing, sold it to the one that was gonna keep those assets. I wonder if he got the highest market rate when he sold it to himself. My guess is no, but we got to take a break. When we come back, I want to hear more about the real estate transaction, but I also want to hear about their selling off of Sears Canada and apparently doing the same thing to the Canadian branch, and all the other ways that Lampert was doing what appears to be, it's perfectly legal now, but it looks, conceptually like embezzlement. We got to take a quick break. We'll be right back after this. I'm Sam Seder. This is Ring of Fire Radio.